In this clip, we'll reload our mesh inside Substance Painter and then use our high resolution asset to bake all the supporting maps that we'll need. All right, great. So I am currently using the M2C06. That's Module 2 Clip 06 begin file. You'll find this in your exercise files. Now, just a word as we move through this course and how you're going to find exercise files handled moving forward. Substance Painter files, SPP files, can get very, very large. The more information you add to it, the more texture you paint inside of it. Therefore, moving forward, we're going to have a begin file like this one for you at the beginning of each module. So we're in Module 2 right now. You can expect the next file inside your exercise files to be the Module 3 begin file. Then there'll be a Module 4 begin file. And inside each of those module begin files, you'll find all of the work that we did in the previous module. Now, I'll also include a final file that has the entire textured asset for you in the exercise files, so you'll see exactly where we ended up. With that said, let's go ahead and jump back into Substance Painter here, and I'm going to simply replace this mesh inside of our project with the new mesh. So let's come up to the Edit menu, down to Project Configuration. In Project Configuration, we're going to come to the very first one. It says Mesh, and we'll hit this Select button. And I'll jump in here, and I'm going to select my Dwarflow Revised file. I'll click Open on that. There we go. Fantastic. Now, we're presented with some options here. We don't want to create a texture set per UDIM tile. That's the same option we saw before when we created this project. And the next option, Preserve Strokes Positions on Mesh. That really doesn't matter because we haven't painted anything yet though, but this can be done later in the process so that any paint that you've applied can be preserved. Now remember, we do want this to be OpenGL, and we'll leave Compute Tangent Space per Fragment off. Let's hit OK. And you can see Substance replaces that mesh very, very quickly. And now when we come in here and begin to look at our vertex normals, we're looking at something that's much more like what I would expect. All of the surfaces that are fairly organic are going to be very soft looking, except for our explicitly defined hard edges, like that one there. So the next step in this process is to bake the additional maps. Now, right now we have 3 texture sets. You can see them right here in my texture set list. And I'm on my texture set settings panel over here. And again, each one of these texture sets is going to have a base color, a height, a roughness, a metallic, and a normal channel. Now, each one of these texture sets can potentially also have these additional maps connected to it. Things like a normal map, a world space normal, an ID map, and so on and so forth. Now, you'll notice that there's nothing here. If we had these already baked and we had imported them in when we created this project, we would be able to click on this and see them here. But again, we didn't do that. So we need to bake these additional maps. It's really not that hard to do. Let's go ahead and just simply click this Bake Textures button right here. And this large baking dialog is going to open up. Now again, I have the body selected right now, which is fine. We'll do these one at a time. But here is kind of the decision you'll have to make when you're moving forward with this. And I want to be able to see the asset while we're doing this so I can point out some things to you. So obviously we have a high resolution copy of this dwarf asset. And in this process of baking these maps, essentially what we're doing is we're transferring the detail in that high resolution mesh to the UVs that are created for this low resolution mesh, in the case of things like the normal map and so on. So here, we need to set some general parameters first, and they're all here under common. So the output size, again, I'm going to match the resolution size for my document. I want 2K maps, so we'll set that here. We're going to leave dilation width alone. By the way, this is a really intuitive dialog. You can actually just mouse over each one of these and it'll tell you right down here in this box at the bottom what that does. So you can just mouse over whichever one of these you want and it'll give you a description. So now that we have the output size, I'm going to leave dilation width alone. Most of the time when I do my initial bakes with Substance Painter, I leave most of these settings just the way they are as a default. Now let's come over here, and the one thing we do want to do is connect a high definition mesh. You can see here that we have warning signs on several of these maps saying, hey, something's going on. More than likely it's because we don't have a high definition mesh defined. So we can click this little page icon right here. I'll go ahead and browse into my geometry folder again. And again, you're going to notice that there are 3 different _high FBX files. Now, this is the way that I have chosen to do this. You could do this all as a single high resolution file. However, again, I'm trying to make this as modular as possible and keeping each one of these texture sets as separate as possible. So one thing that I didn't want to happen is I didn't want ambient occlusion being calculated between the clothing and the body. Because if the clothing changed, I didn't want the ambient occlusion to be baked into the body. And so on and so forth. So we have the body selected. Let's select Dwarf Body High. Hit the open button, and you can see it's connected right there. Awesome. So we have a lot of other settings here, and again, most of the time straight out of the box, I'm not going to mess with any of these. The only thing that I might think about messing with is the anti-aliasing down here. This is an option that if you start to see jaggies, and I say that as a very professional term, the little jagged edges where you can see the pixelated edge on a texture, you can come in here and add a little bit of anti-aliasing. Now, fair warning, this will slow down the baking process. So don't add this until you need it. But let's come in here now that we have our high resolution mesh connected, and let's not bake all texture sets, but bake the body textures. Now I want to go ahead and click that, and you'll see Substance Painter going through the process of baking these. I'm going to pause the video while it does this. All right, great. So it's finished the baking process, and you can see over in my texture set settings, we now have maps that have been connected here to each of the additional maps. Now we don't have an ID map. That's okay. We don't need an ID map for this particular course. But you can see we have all of the supporting maps that we might need. This is perfect. So let's go ahead and go through the process of doing this again. Now, by the way, if you want to know where these maps that we've just baked out are stored, you can actually find them in the shelf. If you come over here under this project category, you can see all of those texture maps. So you can see if I mouse over that, we get a nice large preview of the map. So back over here, let's go ahead and select the hair. We'll do that one next. We'll do the clothing last. And we're going to come back over here and bake textures. Now I'm going to come in here and select this high definition file and remove it. We'll come in and connect in the dwarf hair high, just like so. And let's go ahead and bake the hair textures. And when that wraps up like magic, you can see here, we now have a lot of that high definition detail in the normal map being applied to this asset. Let's go ahead and do the last texture set here. I'll select the clothing, and we'll come over and bake textures. We'll replace this file with the correct high resolution file, Dwarf Clothing High. And let's go ahead and bake the clothing textures. And when that bake completes, amazing. You can see we now have all of this nice detail on the final texture set here. Now, it's always a good idea after you have baked those additional maps to come through here and begin examining your bake and see how that went, because sometimes you do get errors in your bake. If we come over here and begin to look, you can see, okay, all right, everything's looking good so far. Now I'll hold shift and right click and move my light around so I can see the back. And okay, I see a problem. Look at the wrinkles on the back side of his pants. We have sort of a few wrinkles here, but it looks like something happened and just sort of cropped the wrinkles out right here. This is the same type of thing that you can expect when you're baking from one mesh to another, because that bake has a distance on it, and sometimes that distance isn't quite configured right by default. So we need to change that. The beautiful thing is, Substance Painter, we can bake these again. Let's come into the clothing, bake textures, and again, we can come over here and make sure that we have the correct high resolution file defined. And I do. Awesome. So we can come in here, and really what we're looking at here is one of the distances, either the max frontal distance or the max rear distance. Now I'm going to bounce into Maya really quickly so I can show you what these two meshes together look like. You can come over here inside this revised file. Actually, I'm going to take the high resolution file out, so you won't be able to do this unless you do some importing. But I'm going to come in here and I'm going to set my dwarf clothing to a template layer, sort of like that. I'm going to bring in the visibility on the dwarf high. So the problem here is there is too much distance, and you can see this right here between the high resolution mesh and the game resolution mesh. Those rays that are shooting out and looking for that detail, they're not getting it because they're not going far enough. So that's not a big deal. Let's jump back over here and we can come back into, in this case, it would be the max rear distance. And I'm just going to change this from a value of 0.01 to a value of 0.1, just like so. And let's bake the clothing textures again. And when that bake finishes up, hey, there we go. Now you can start to see we're getting more and more of those wrinkles. In fact, I think we have the perfect amount of them with that first try. So you can see here, baking is kind of a science, but it's not a perfect science. So those settings in the bake dialog, while they are great out of the box, sometimes you find a situation unique to your asset where you need to come in and make some changes. Now, there are a tremendous amount of settings inside this bake dialog. We're not going to obviously go through all of these, but know that there are common parameters here. If we collapse this rollout, we also have parameters that are uniquely related to each one of the different maps that we baked. So you can come over here and you can see with the normal and the world space normal, there are none, but there are some for ID, ambient occlusion, curvature, position, and thickness. So with that said, that is going to bring us to the end of this clip. Now, there are situations where you may need to actually paint additional detail or fix an error in the baking that is unique to your asset that can't be fixed in those settings. We'll look at a situation just like that in the next clip.